So for this task, the boss wants a total for all the invoices in the second half of 2019. So I've already entered my heading for this task, and now I'm going to enter the query that is going to give us the information. So for this one, we do need a date range. So we are going to be using the between clause. And I'm going to sum up invoice total, give it a little alias of total invoices. And that's all coming from the invoices table. And this is where the invoice date is between, I'm going to use this clause, and single quotes 2019-06-01 and in single quotes 2019-12-31. And we're going to go ahead and run this. And the total that we see is how many invoices, the total amount, for that second half of 2019. And let's move our closing comment down. And our next scenario, our boss wants the number of vendors, the number of vendor invoices, so that would be count, the average invoice amount, and the total invoice amount. So we're going to need to use the count, average, and sum functions. They only want data after January 1st, 2020. And they do not want vendors duplicated. All right, so we're going to use AP. And we're going to do a select. And the first thing they wanted was the vendor ID, but we're not supposed to duplicate it. So we're going to have to use the distinct clause on this one. And they wanted us to count them. So we're going to use count. And then in parentheses, we're going to add the distinct qualifier in front of vendor ID. And we're going to give it a little alias as the number using a hash here of vendors. And let's see, they want the number of vendors and they also want the number of vendor invoices. So we're basically, it's going to be the same thing, but you know, who are we to question these things? So we're going to count vendor ID. You'll notice we did not put distinct in this one. And that is because a single vendor could have multiple invoices. So that is where these two counts differ. So our first count is just the number of unduplicated vendors. And then because the vendors can submit multiple invoices, this is going to give us the total number of invoices. Okay, and the vendor ID here can be duplicated because vendor might have more than one invoice. Let's see, the next thing they were asking is the average invoice amount. And I think I'll put that on the next line. So we're just going to do an average of the total. And we'll call this invoice average. And then the last thing they wanted was the total, the grand total invoice amount. So we're going to use sum for that. And we're just going to simply call it invoice total. And this is all coming from invoices. And now we have to indicate that we only want invoices after January 1st. So we will say greater than January 1st. And we don't really need to include January 1st on this because we aren't open. So what it'll do is it'll start looking at January 2nd and include all of those invoices. So let's go ahead and execute. So we have 14 unduplicated vendors. Those 14 vendors submitted a total of 34 invoices. This is the average invoice amount, and then this is the total of all of those invoices.